My name is Janice Lindstrom, and I teach sophomore and junior music therapy majors in Meadows. And I have been a music therapist for 30 years now. And so today I'm talking about building inclusive classrooms, strategies for fostering belonging and engagement. And so I thought of three questions that we would try to answer during this time. And it's why should we do this anyway? What is an inclusive classroom? And why does inclusion matter? And then how do I build an inclusive classroom? So we want to do this because of government regulations. And if you're interested in the laws that govern higher education and equal access and inclusion, I'm happy to go into detail about that. But I feel like those are also things that you could Google if you're really interested in the laws. So I'm going to bypass some of that legal information and just talk about inclusion from my experience and how I create a more inclusive classroom. So the inclusive classroom is designed to be an equitable, flexible curriculum that is accessible for all students to the greatest extent possible. And it incorporates many of the ideas and advances from laws and policies that specifically apply to individuals with disabilities, although it has come to benefit all people, not just those with disabilities. I know I benefit from the closed captioning on TV shows that I can't keep up with or understand the British accents, which is I feel kind of sad about that, but that's how I am right now. So I get a benefit from these accessibility tools that are provided. So why does inclusion matter? And I feel like in our current climate, it gets harder and harder to understand why inclusion matters or to feel like it does matter. But it's really important because it it's the idea of fostering an environment in which disadvantaged students are um, able to flourish and have their voices heard. So, inclusion in higher education ensures that students are not just given a seat at the table, but that the correct support and resources are available so that they're able to have their voices heard. And I feel like we in that are in higher education understand that with when you don't have a diverse student population, an inclusive environment cannot be created. And if you don't have an inclusive environment, you can't have diversity in the classroom. And it's they're both important to develop together and support together. So inclusion can come by the way of support groups or policy changes or adjustments to an organization's culture, but the goal is always going to be the same, which is to encourage the active participation of a diverse student body across many different fields of study. And so um, here's a list of some of the most common benefits in an enriched educational experience because we learn from other people with different cultures and beliefs and perspectives which are different from our own. And so people that are brought up differently than us bring fresh perspectives and ideas, promoting a healthy and flourishing learning environment for everyone. Um, it enhances innovation with a broader talent pool and it increases those chances of innovation. So most academic higher education institutes are centered around academic progression, and so this enhanced innovation is a top priority. Um, so when we open our doors to a wider range of people, then it expands our pool of prospective students, and more importantly, we have happier students. So when we have more happier students, it helps to solidify our institution's place as a reputable, high-performing contributor to the education system. It also ensures diversity and inclusion compliance with federal laws, as long as they still exist, um, and promotes a progressive, healthier society, um, that challenges deep-rooted stereotype preconceptions and demands that people challenge their unconscious bias while learning to communicate with people from a different range of cultural backgrounds. Um, and in the classroom, especially in higher education, we have a lot of students coming in that may have certain disabilities or diagnoses or learning differences that they do not disclose, that they do not go to get DAS accommodations for, and they still deserve to learn and access their education that they're here for. Um, so, oh, okay. Um, so the universal
I never would have thought that. Possible to there.
The universal design for learning is a framework that guides the design of learning environments that are accessible and inclusive and challenging for every learner. And ultimately, the goal of the universal design for learning is to support learner agency and build the capacity to actively participate in making choices in the service of learning goals. Universal design for learning was based on the universal design in architecture, where they look at designing buildings and infrastructure that does not have or create barriers for the people that are living and using in those areas. So um, the guidelines that inform the design of learning environments to support learner agency are purposeful, reflective, resourceful, authentic, strategic, and action oriented. So universal design for learning aims to change the design of the environment rather than to situate the problem as a perceived deficit within the learner. When environments are intentionally designed to reduce barriers, every learner can engage in rigorous, meaningful learning. And so agency involves the learner's ability to regulate their own affective, cognitive, and behavioral processes as they interact within the learning environment. So it's essential to consider how structural dynamics influence learner agency. And their ability of the students to act as powerful agents relates to the structure of the learning community and the extent to which all voices, regardless of their perceived status, are valued and able to contribute. And so we want to design learning environments that support learner agency, and this requires continually examining the relationship between educators and students and creating space for learners to make sense of the content individually and collectively through interaction and reflection. And supporting learner agency requires recognizing dimensions of culture and identity and examining where bias may be a barrier to learners being able to fully exercise their agency. So purposeful, the principle of being purposeful is the internalized self-efficacy, acting in ways that are personally and socially meaningful. Reflective, so self-awareness and metacognition to identify internal motivations and external influences that support learning and make adjustments when necessary. Resourceful, um, understanding and applying assets, strengths, resources, and linguistic and cultural capital. Authentic, so we need to increase comprehension and deepening understanding in ways that are genuine. Our strategies need to be strategic, so we need to set goals and monitor the learning with intentionality and planfulness, and they need to be action oriented. So they need to be self-directed and collective action in pursuit of the learning goals. So the principles of a universal approach for inclusive classrooms are that learning differences are viewed on a continuum and expectations are high for all students. The course is designed to be accessible, equitable, and flexible. It's a proactive process, not an afterthought, that requires knowledge of the student's needs and characteristics, knowledge of activity and task requirements, and universal strategies that first meet the student's diverse needs, and then only as necessary, providing individual adaptations. The universal approach is designed to allow all students to be successful and progress in the same curriculum with the same performance standards to the extent that is appropriate. So students participate in the same classroom activities, tasks, and routines to the extent possible. There's flexible and multiple strategies that meet the students' diverse learning needs and may reduce or eliminate the need for individual adaptations. And the quality of learning, the learning experience is not compromised for any student. So the goal of the universal design for learning is learner agency that is purposeful and reflective, resourceful and authentic, strategic and action-oriented. So the CAST is a organization that developed the Universal Design for Learning guidelines, and they're in their version 3.0. And so that's what you're seeing an image of on the screen. So there's three main areas for designing the universal design for the three guidelines. So the first guideline is around designing multiple means of engagement. The second guideline is designing multiple means of representation. And the third guideline is designing multiple means of action and expression. And so there are three areas that we can provide these design changes in access, we can, and in support that's provided, and then the executive function skills. So right. So the design options for engagement, for multiple means of engagement that relate to access, include welcoming interests and identities. So in that, you would optimize choice and autonomy, optimize relevance, value, and authenticity, nurture joy and play, and address biases, threats, and distractions. To design options for sustaining effort and persistence would provide support by clarifying the meaning and purpose of goals, optimize challenge and support, foster collaboration, interdependence, and collective learning, foster belonging and community, and offer action-oriented feedback. And then the design options for emotional capacity are related to executive function. So helping the students to recognize expectations, beliefs, and motivations, develop awareness of self and others, and promote individual and collective reflection, and cultivate empathy and restorative practices. And so the middle column is the design of multiple means of representation with design options for perception and language and symbols and building knowledge. So the perception includes support opportunities to customize the display of information, support multiple ways to perceive information, and to represent a diversity of perspectives and identities in authentic ways. And the design options for language and symbols are to clarify vocabulary, symbols, and language structures, support decoding of text, mathematical notation, and symbols, and cultivate understanding and respect across languages and dialects, address biases in the use of language and symbols, and illustrate through multiple media. And then the design options for building knowledge are to connect prior knowledge to new learning, highlight and explore patterns, critical features, big ideas, and relationships, cultivate multiple ways of knowing and of making meaning, and then maximizing transfer and generalization. I know the last column over there is for the designing the multiple means of action and expression. And the design options for interaction include vary and honor the methods of response, navigation and movement, optimize access to accessible materials and assistive and accessible technologies and tools, The design options for expression and communication use multiple media for communication, use multiple tools for construction, composition, and creativity, build fluencies with graduated support for practice and performance, and address biases related to modes of expression and communication. And the design options for strategy development include set meaningful goals, anticipate and plan for challenges, organize information and resources, enhance capacity for monitoring progress, and challenge exclusionary practices. So what does all of this mean? How can I incorporate universal design for learning now? So there's some suggestions that were made for higher education about some activities that faculty can do to help incorporate some of these UDL strategies or guidelines in their classroom. So one is to keep students engaged in large lectures. You can integrate active learning strategies that work in large classrooms through a UDL engagement sprint. So in this strategy, you would present a traditional lecture format where like the professor is speaking for 50 minutes with slides like this one. And then you can identify engagement barriers like passive learning, lack of interaction, and difficulty focusing. And then brainstorm some quick UDL-based engagement strategies, such as using polling software, think, pair, share with nearby students, clicker questions for Google Forms or for participation, or short music-based brain breaks. So you could select one strategy to try in your course. Second suggestion is the lecture material audit, where you evaluate and enhance your lecture materials to make them more accessible and flexible. So here you could look at a lecture slide deck or notes and use a UDL checklist to evaluate your materials based on text readability. So looking at contrast and font size and is the language simple enough to understand. Provide alternative representations like visual summaries or captioned videos, and making the lecture materials available beforehand. So like providing slides or transcripts ahead of time. And you could incorporate a universal design for learning guideline by revising at least one slide to improve accessibility and share improvements with a partner. The third option is to look at creating flexible assessments for large classes. So you want to explore scalable assessment alternatives that support diverse learning needs. Like you could present a traditional large class assessment, like a timed multiple choice test, and then think of alternative ways to assess knowledge, such as open book reflections with key takeaways, concept mapping, audio or video response options with rubrics for grading efficiency of those, and then or use small group collaborative quizzes. So you could select an alternative to pilot in your class. The fourth option is the immediate application for universal design for learning teaching plan activity called One Small Change, where you commit to a small impactful UDL change in your lecture course. And so this is where you create a universal design for learning teaching plan template that outlines the current challenge. So a barrier that you've identified in your large class, a UDL strategy, identifying a change that you want to implement, and then identify the expected impact, how it will help the students, and we'll share plans for feedback and accountability. And so I'm going to give some examples of this one small change and some different styles of teaching, because my teaching is all with about 4 or 5 students at a time, teaching a very specific topic, how to be music therapists. And so that may not apply across the university. So I have a few examples to share, and then we're going to try this out ourselves. Okay, so the Example is a interactive problem solving in a physics lecture. The challenge is that the students struggle to follow long-term problem solving demonstrations in a physics lecture, leading to passive learning and disengagement. The strategy that is suggested is to introduce a real-time problem solving checkpoints using polling software like Poll Everywhere or Clickers. And so you do that by, after introducing a physics concept, present an incomplete equation or graph and have students submit answers via the polling software. And then the instructor can review the common mistakes and explain solutions before moving on. The impact that's expected for this strategy is that students get immediate feedback on their understanding. The approach supports different learning paces and allows students who need more time to catch up. And it reduces reliance on text-heavy explanations, benefiting students with learning disabilities or those that have English as a second language. Another example from the humanities is that multimodal analysis in a literature lecture, where the challenge is that students find it difficult to engage with classic literature because the text feels distant or complex. A strategy is to provide multiple entry points for analysis by incorporating video and audio components. So instead of discussing a novel through text alone, you could present an illustrated version, an audiobook excerpt, or a film adaptation of the same scene and ask students to compare how meaning changes across those formats. And then offer participation options where the students can write a response or record a short verbal reflection or post insights on a class discussion board. The impact might be that it supports different learning preferences and helps neurodiverse students who may process information more easily in non-text formats and encourage more diverse participation as students can choose how to express their analysis. A third example is a real world application in an intro to psychology lecture, where the challenge is that students struggle to connect abstract psychological theories to real world situations, leading to low engagement. Um, you could use student generated case studies to apply psychological theories. So provide a brief overview of the psychological concept and have students submit real life examples that illustrate the concept, and then they can select and discuss a few examples in class, allowing the students to vote on which ones are most compelling. So the impact is that it can increase relevance, making the abstract theories more tangible. It can support multiple ways of engaging. Students can contribute anonymously online through small group discussion or verbally, and it can help students apply knowledge and improve retention. So what I'd like for you to do is to identify a barrier that you've encountered in your class and think about a change, a UDL strategy that you'll use to implement, and think about how it will help your students. What is the expected impact? And so I want to give you a few minutes to do that, and then I'll ask you to share what you've thought of. About 30 more seconds to wrap up some thoughts. Okay, so who can identify a current barrier that you've identified in your class?
Good afternoon. My name is Patty Taylor, and I'm an adjunct professor, Lyle School of Engineering, Civil and Environmental Engineering. I teach a project management class in the summer from 5 p.m. to 9:20 on Monday evenings. It's very lecture intensive, I'll put it that way. And a lot of the students, I have both undergraduates and graduate students, so a lot of people are like me. They worked all day, and now they're going to school from 5 p.m. to 9:20 at night. So I have in-class students and also distance students. So that's kind of the scenario that I see. The challenge is to keep these students awake, engaged, and learn a massive quantity of materials that I'm providing to them. So one of the things I think I'm going to try to do is do this polling and kind of break the materials up a little bit in like little short quizzes. So it's not just, I do in-class exercises and hand out quizzes and things, but I think I need to move to more of an electronic polling type quiz thing to not only check their knowledge, but also to keep the remote students more engaged. So hopefully engagement will go up and they'll learn the material.
Great. Thank you. Somebody else want to share?
Sure. I don't teach huge sections, but smaller groups, but still, I mean, I teach language mostly. And one of the challenges is that the students, things that you assumed in the past that they knew how to do before they got to college, they don't do that anymore. For example, note taking. They don't even have a clue about how to take notes and be engaged really with what we're talking about. So I've been working on this already, but kind of like giving them a skeleton of notes that they have to complete as we go through stuff. The poll, incorporating the polling sounds like an interesting idea, especially as an anonymous thing, right? That they don't feel that they're, even in a small class, I could see that that could be beneficial. So I might incorporate that. I also use Kahoot a lot. So maybe even through Kahoots, you can do that. I use it mostly to review stuff, or maybe while we're looking at things, I can create a little, engagement like that. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, plus having them look at their technology can provide a mediator for the very shy or the person that has trouble communicating verbally without a lot of thought. Okay, would anyone that's attending online like to share a challenge that you've identified in your class?
You can just unmute yourself if you want to contribute.
Okay, that's fine. I presented this CTE seminar in a way that was like a large lecture with minimal engagement. So I thought it would be a great example that we could use to talk about, like, what is the current barrier that you've identified for your ability to participate and consume the knowledge that was presented in this class today. So what are some challenges that you had during this presentation?
For me, I have a line. I wear contacts, but I
You have to use the mic so that they can hear you online.
sorry, I would say maybe like to have those, that would have been useful for me to have it a bit bigger. I can't see too well from here, the small font. So I guess, either having a,
Having a handout maybe.
handout for people or.
Mhm.
And I think the same thing for the folks that were online, because for the
Oh, yeah.
folks online, we're not sharing the presentation, which usually would stay bigger onto the screen. What they can see is basically like this, which is Janice and the screen. However, because I knew that it was going to be harder for them to read, I provided them with alternate ways of getting the materials. So I provided them with the link to the presentation. So if they needed to open it and see it bigger on their screens, they could, and they could zoom in. But it would have been a challenge if, provided. So
Excellent. Okay, so we talked about the challenge, the strategy, and how we expect the impact. Are there any other, what about attending online? Were there any challenges that you experienced online? There's comments. I don't know if they're for me or not.
they said it was very helpful to have the presentation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure also if we didn't have the microphones for the folks that were online, I mean, the reason why we are now very intentional about turning the microphone on, and even for the participants to have a microphone that we can pass out, is that the mics that are built into the room are not very good. So they would not be able to hear what the comments are when we have the participation and engagement of the session.
Yeah.
So she said, hearing evenly online, which, if you're not, holding the microphone in a certain way, certain position. it might
So
be
a
different.
barrier is to be able to hear evenly when it's, especially when it's a hybrid
Yeah,
presentation.
yeah, but even, in face-to-face instructions, there's so many classrooms at SMU that are big, and wearing a microphone, even if you don't have a huge class, can be very helpful for all to hear. Or sometimes if a faculty member is wearing a mask, if sometimes you choose to mask yourself, having that microphone can really help the students hear you if you can't project the voice or they can't read your lips as you are speaking. So
Right. So being aware, I go to conferences a lot, and music therapists pride ourselves on being one of the things that I did a lot in my career was singing in long-term care settings to a bunch of people that are older adults that have lost their hearing, especially in the higher frequencies where my voice tends to be. And so I pride myself on being able to project and have even hard of hearing people able to hear me. And I know a lot of music therapists that present at conferences feel the same way, but when I'm sitting in the audience, even if they're projecting well, it comes off better with the microphone. And so I think the more that we eliminate that fear of the microphone that speakers might have and say, you can all hear me, right? Don't assume that, and just use the microphone so that everyone can hear. Any other examples that you want to talk about that were barriers for your participation in this class?
perhaps the intentional, I mean, there was an intentional break for the activity, but having more of those intentional breaks for interaction.
Spacing it out throughout the,
Yeah.
so that you're interacting with the material as it goes along.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Or if providing opportunities for the students to ask any questions about the material up to a certain point, right? So now we can ask questions about the whole presentation, but be intentional about breaking it down. So, okay, so far, any questions, kind of
Right, or
checking for
having,
understanding.
right, having some sort of interactive, manipulate the materials in your own way
Yes.
out loud so that you can gain more understanding throughout the presentation instead of just at the end. All right. And then,
One of the comments online was, in an online setting also helps to have the screen instructions for the activity.
oh, you're right. So instead of just silence, I know, I just attended an online webinar where they were doing breakout rooms on Zoom, but I was attending asynchronously. I had no idea what they were doing when they took breaks, and yet here I didn't even follow that advice. It's because I'm really nervous talking to all of you, and so, but that doesn't support the needs of the learners.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just have a question. Could you give us an example of a practical way of how you've incorporated this into one of your classes?
So one of the things that I try to do, because I've been learning by example from other people that I've seen do this, is I try to not assume that I know that it's not good policy to read your slides as you present. And also, it's hard sometimes to process the visual information. I have a difficult time processing visual information. It's not my preferred way of learning. And so if someone reads through what is on the screen, it gives me an opportunity to hear it and to process it in the way that I do prefer to learn. And so doing more description, um, I've seen a lot of pedagogy saying that you need to make your slides pop, and sometimes that decreases the visibility or increases the distraction. And so I try to keep it super simple. Um, and I try to alternate the ways that you can present information back. So I mean, in a music therapy class, I feel like it's really easy to say, so you could submit it in writing, or you could submit it in a video, or you could submit it in a song. And that would be harder to do like in a math class. But if you can vary the ways that the student can participate in or provide the response to your assignments, um, that is going to be really helpful for some students that might be processing the information differently. I also provide a lot of reading guides in Canvas for um, when I assign chapters to read. I provide a reading guide, and my students have now finally learned that they could look at that, and it provides some really good information for them, like what might be on a test or something. And I provide a class outline in Canvas so that it can guide their note taking, because I've noticed students do not take notes anymore. I don't know how that works, but I provide outlines for the reading and for the class outline, what we're going to cover in that class, so that it can guide and organize their note taking if they choose to do that. And I tend not to share my slides because all of that same information that was presented up here is in writing on Canvas. And so they still take pictures of the slides anyway. Okay, so some places that you can go to get more information about this is a website that was designed by CAST called Universal Design for Learning Guidelines version 3.0. And the colored grids and all of that came from that website. And they have ways that you can click into each of those. You can click into each, like you can click into engagement and see breakdowns of these boxes underneath with some more suggestions and guidelines for how to adapt based on where in the grid you need to adapt. Okay, so it can make it pretty big. And so that website is udlguidelines.cast.org. A book that I consulted, it was written by Judith Jellison, who was she was a music therapist and then was teaching not music therapy, but she taught in the music department at University of Texas. And I think she just retired recently, but she wrote a book called Including Everyone, Creating Music Classrooms Where All Children Learn. And her book is designed to speak to K through 12 music teachers, but the information that is provided is not specific to music classes. Like her point of writing the book, it's pretty easy to read. She goes through the laws of accessibility and why we have to do this from a legal standpoint in a way that's clearer to understand than a lot of other websites that I came across on Google that explained the laws. And she asked a lot of questions in the text that help you guide your thinking through some of these steps for the universal design for learning. And then you're always welcome to reach out to me if you have specific questions that I might be able to answer. And you can find me on the SMU websites or by asking Addie Tolliver or any of that.
And Janice is one of our spring faculty affiliates for the CT, so she'll be presenting additional sessions. Thank you.
All right, thank you.